Evening, everyone. I'm just sort of letting people filter in. We'll just give it sort of 30 seconds or so to make sure everyone makes it in okay from the waiting room and is connected to their speakers and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, sort of deluge is sort of slightly slowed, and it's on me that we started late. I was having some issues. So thanks very much for joining us this evening, everybody. So my name is Jess. I am the outreach coordinator at the Inner Temple. So it's really nice to welcome you all here this evening, along with our lovely panelists as well. So sort of how the evening will go. I'm going to run through some housekeeping and kind of basic information first, sort of for around kind of 10, 15 minutes, just to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page, coming at this topic from the sort of same level of knowledge. And then we'll hand over to the real reason that you're here is to hear from people who actually, transitioned to a career at the bar, went to a career at the bar. And the point of this evening is that we're looking at slightly alternative routes to practicing at the bar. So if you've attended one of these events before, one of our insight events, not always, but most of the time, people on our panels will have kind of, done the bar course, gone on to become a barrister, fairly straightforward journey. And our panelists tonight have taken slightly more sort of winding routes, which some of you may find inspiring, reassuring. You might think, oh no, I don't want to do that. I know what I want to do. I'm going to do it one way. But the point of tonight is to kind of show you that there is no one way necessarily to become a barrister. There's no one way to necessarily be a barrister. And hopefully it provides a little bit of insight for you. So we're looking to wrap up that panel session at around 7, and then so there'll be hopefully plenty of time for questions. So please do sort of start thinking about those questions. You should see a Q&A box sort of at the bottom of your screen, so you can pop questions in there. You can ask them anonymously, or you can put your name on them. It's totally up to you. While you're more than welcome to ask questions kind of as we go. You don't have to hold them until that kind of question and answer session at the end. Simple ones that probably don't really require a discussion, I may well just answer in the Q&A box, so keep an eye out for a response, and some others will hold to sort of be discussed during that Q&A session by the panel. Tonight's session will be recorded, and the recording will be circulated around everybody who registered tomorrow or the day after. Sort of depends when I remember to send the email. Okay, cool. So we like to kind of cover a few key points about the profession before we get started. So many barristers will tell you, and I'm sure our panelists would as well, that it's a career that is really highly rewarding. It is also intellectually stimulating, and that kind of contributes to that sense of reward. There can be a flexibility there, perhaps rarely found in other professions, particularly if you are self-employed. So we have a couple of self-employed panelists, so they can maybe talk to that, whereas we've also got some in employed practice as well. And that sense of being in employed practice can look very different to what you might think of as a traditional barrister. And so it's important to kind of remember, again, like I said at the beginning, there's no one way to be a barrister. Around 80% of barristers in England and Wales are self-employed, and then around 20% are in employed practice. And we'd say that the employed bar is kind of a growing area as well. So that might be that you are employed within a law firm alongside solicitors. You might work in a regulatory body as kind of general counsel. You might work for large sort of multinational corporation who requires in-house counsel. You might work for the government legal department or in the Crown Prosecution Service. So there are lots of different kind of options in employed practice as well. Regardless of kind of which area you're looking for, self-employed or employed, it is still a really competitive and rigorous process to become a barrister. And to put that into kind of very rough figures, and that's what these figures are here, you've got around 500 pupillage vacancies each year versus around 5,500 for solicitor training contracts. So far fewer pupillage vacancies, but then you also have fewer people who are interested in becoming a barrister. But it's sometimes, I think, a little bit reassuring or helpful to kind of see those figures. So here I've outlined the route to the bar. Now, what is important to kind of caveat this with is that you'll hear from a few people tonight for whom this was not the route they took to the bar. But this is what we would call the traditional route to the bar. It's not something that you necessarily have to do, but the point is that there are key components of education and training that you have to complete in order to become a barrister. And this is one of the ways that you can do that. So first off, we have the academic stage. Many of you here tonight will be at that stage yourselves. So that might be that you're studying an undergraduate law degree, an LLB, or that you hold an LLB, or perhaps you might have studied something other than law at the undergraduate level, and then you're perhaps doing the GDLs, the Graduate Diploma in Law, otherwise called the conversion course, or the PGDL, or MLaw as well. So lots of different courses that you can do. But the ultimate kind of sort of takeaway there is that being a barrister is a graduate only profession. You have to have a degree, and then you have to have a law qualification on top of that. Some of you may well have obtained your first law degree in another country. You may well then be told that you still have to do something like the GDL in this country to make sure that you're covering the right bits of law. So it's important to know kind of which educational qualifications you need before making those decisions. Once you've got a law degree of some type, you then move on to what we call the vocational stage. So that is doing the bar course via an education provider like a university, so like City, for example, Cardiff, UE, Northumbria, Nottingham, right? Lots of different universities provide that, as well as the Inns of Court College for Advocacy. That is typically a year-long course, an academic year-long course that has a variety of kind of actual physical kind of like tests, like advocacy tests and that kind of thing, as well as written exams as well. That can be quite a grueling year. It is quite a complex qualification. And then alongside that, you do qualifying sessions with your Inn of Court, which used to be dinners, and now they are educational lectures, workshops, advocacy seminars, that kind of thing. If you then pass your bar course and you do the requisite qualifying sessions, you're then called to the bar by your Inn of Court. And we are the only organisations in England and Wales that can do that. And while you then get the title barrister, once you've been called, you aren't really a practicing barrister until you've undertaken pupillage. So that is a year of work-based training. So split into a first 6 months sort of observing, shadowing your pupil supervisor, but also other members of chambers or the organisation that you work for. You're not necessarily undertaking build work, for example. Then you have your second 6, where you are on your feet, you are working, you are practicing. So you might be in court if that's the area of work that you happen to kind of be in. You're drafting advice, etc. And that's billable hours that you're undertaking during that second 6. And then after that, you have tenancy and so on and so forth, or an employed position. It is, as I said earlier, it's pupillage that is the particularly competitive part of it. Getting onto the bar course, for example, is not particularly competitive. There are lots of providers who would like to charge you lots of money to do the course, and so it is not as a competitive process. In terms of how to get to the bar, how do you sort of set yourself out from other people, right? I've already said it's very competitive. It's important to be realistic. 97% of people who obtain pupillage, so pupils have a 2-1 or higher in either their undergraduate law degree or their GDL. A much higher percentage of students with firsts obtain pupillage in areas like commercial and chancery law, whereas in family, crime, etc., it's more of an even split between 2-1s and firsts. So commercial and chancery law, to get pupillage, you need a first, broadly speaking, these days. So it's important to bear that in mind. It is really important to be determined and to be resilient. You will fail at some points. I'm sure our panelists will talk about things that perhaps they have failed at during this process, right? Those kind of setbacks are part and parcel of a career at the bar. You will not win every case. This is not a TV show. You will lose sometimes, and you have to kind of become accustomed to that. And so when thinking about whether or not to pursue this career, you need to think about whether that is something that you are comfortable with. Can your resilience kind of handle that? I myself, I've never had any interest in becoming a barrister, and it doesn't appeal to me at all. I experience a lot of failure in my personal life because I'm a Spurs fan. I don't need that kind of level in my professional life as well. And so I know that that's, it's not the career for me. So it's important to kind of have a think of that, sort of reflect on your own self, and what it is that you're good at, to think about whether or not you could handle it. Mini pupilages or work experience are a really good way to ensure kind of success, although they're not the only thing that you can do, and they're not guaranteed to then get you an offer of pupillage. But you should be looking to try and get a mini pupillage or work experience in particular in another area, whether that's voluntary or paid, and whether it's related to the law or not. When it comes to pupillage interviews, scholarship interviews, you're not always going to want to use an example that you won this mooting competition. That maybe is not the best way to illustrate it. Maybe you work in McDonald's, maybe you work in your student union bar, maybe you're a care home assistant, maybe you're an unpaid carer for a family member. Think about what kinds of skills those roles have given you, because most of the time, a barrister's work involves working with people, whether that's individuals or, companies and the people within them. And so you need to think about whether or not you have experience of working with people and how to demonstrate that experience, how to demonstrate those skills. You probably have a lot more to offer than you think, and it's important to try and reflect on your experiences and think about what it is that you could bring to a career at the bar. So I mentioned how bar course providers would like to charge you lots of money. So you can see at the top there that the bar course can cost you up to £20,000 in tuition fees. If you choose to combine it with an LLM, so a master's, and you're eligible for postgraduate student funding, then you may be able to take out a postgraduate student loan to contribute towards the costs of your bar course. But that obviously is that you're taking on more debt, and not every provider offers the LLM with the bar course. So the Inns of Court do offer scholarships to try and help with those costs, and those awards are up to kind of £20,000. So, that is pretty much your course fees paid for, and then you have to figure out how you're going to pay to live, right? Which is becoming increasingly more expensive. There is no getting away from the fact that this is an expensive route to pursue. And I don't say that to scare you, but to try and sort of make it clear that it's something you need to think through, although you're probably well aware of that already. So yeah, all four Inns of Court offer scholarships. All four of us award our scholarships on merit first. And what I mean by that is how well you perform across application form and interview. And then how much you get is means tested. So we ask about kind of your anticipated income during that bar course year and your anticipated expenditure. So things like course fees, rent or your mortgage, travel costs, that kind of thing, childcare costs. And then we do some calculation and kind of base the award amount on that. If you were judged to have the minimum amount of financial need, but you got a scholarship, we would give you £3,000. If you were judged to have the maximum amount of financial need, we would give you £20,000. So that's the kind of the difference. You may have also heard of pupillage drawdown. So you apply for pupillage around sort of 18 months in advance. So lots of people will apply before they even start the bar course because they know they want that guaranteed sort of job basically at the end of it. So they might get pupillage, and then their chambers, depending on the practice area, may say, okay, you can draw down some of your pupillage award, i.e. the salary for the year of pupillage, and put that towards your bar course fees. It's really important to bear in mind that in areas like crime, family, and certain sets, right, particularly those not based in London, your pupillage award may be at the minimum amount, which is, kind of, yeah, slightly upwards of £20,000. You won't be able to draw down that necessarily, or you won't necessarily want to. So again, an important kind of thing to consider, but not by no means a guarantee. And around kind of 50% of people will who kind of get pupillage each year aren't those who are doing it 18 like before the bar course. That was a really very very poor way to phrase that, but yeah, lots of people start the bar course without that guarantee of pupillage, and there is an element of kind of risk versus reward with this. When it comes to scholarships and kind of what we want, I realize I have not actually updated yeah this slide. So we do currently interview everybody who applies for a scholarship at Inner Temple, and Middle Temple does the same. However, in the future, that kind of may change simply because of capacity. We interviewed just under 500 people in the last bar course scholarship round, which logistically, as I'm sure you can imagine, is very challenging. In the case where you're guaranteed an interview, the application form is still marked, and so I'd really encourage you to put a lot of effort into that application form. There's no point thinking I've got a guaranteed interview. No problem. I'll just sort of put the application form in and worry about it later. If you do that, you won't get a scholarship. You won't score highly enough on the application form to get you a scholarship. So please don't do that. The criteria are, crucial to the application form and the interview. They're on our website. But so just to kind of reiterate, they are academic performance, advocacy potential, legal comprehension and reasoning, professionalism and interpersonal skills, and motivation to pursue a career at the bar. Everything on the application form of the interview kind of goes back to those criteria. So think quite carefully about good examples to use to illustrate those skills, or really touch a little bit on interpersonal skills. Doesn't always have to be a legal example that you use. It can be totally, non-legal, totally out of left field. You might think, how is this related? But I'm sure it can demonstrate something. Advocacy is not just about advocacy within the law. We do it a lot in our personal and professional lives without perhaps realizing. In terms of timelines, if you are looking to start the bar course next autumn, you will need to apply in the upcoming round for a bar course scholarship. We have recently changed our eligibility criteria. So if you're planning to start the bar course this September part-time or January 2026, you have missed the boat. You won't be able to apply in the next round. And so, it might be that you need to delay starting the bar course for a year, which is perfectly fine. Lots of people will take several years or even decades, between sort of their undergraduate degree and the bar course. And you'll hear, of course, from panelists who took a slightly different tack as well. So there's more than one way to get there, but just bear in mind that kind of timeline. Those dates and timelines are all on our website, and that is for the bar course scholarships. GDL scholarships, some of you may well be attending interviews in a couple of weeks, and that's for a September 2025 entry. So you don't have to think quite so far in advance if you're thinking about the GDL. Cool. Okay, so that's it from me. Hopefully that'll stop sharing. Cool. So I'm going to hand over to our chair for the evening, Her Honour Judge Jessica Pemberton, and then she'll kind of hand over to our panelists in turn as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy kind of the discussion. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm sorry you've got a substitute chair today, but I hope you'll still find the talks that we all give to be interesting. Rather than handing over to Claire or Emily at this stage, I'll just begin by setting out a little bit about me and my journey to the bar. As Jess has introduced me, I'm now a circuit judge sitting in Sheffield. I'm a family judge and have been a family judge for 11 years now. But I started off as a solicitor. Before that, I went to state school in Sheffield. I got very mediocre O-levels, as they were then. Some of you may have heard of them. And went on and got fairly mediocre A-levels, but they were just enough to get me a place at Keele University. My original plan had been to study media studies because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had the opportunity to do A-level law, and I actually really enjoyed that. So changed my plans once I'd got my A-level results, and ended up doing a joint honours degree in law and sociology at Keele. During my time at Keele, I had to make decisions about whether I wanted to become a solicitor or a barrister. I was really, really nervous about going to the bar when I was a student. And as Jess was saying, I think you have to have a huge degree of resilience and confidence. I was too nervous that I wouldn't earn any money and I wouldn't be able to survive. So I decided to become a solicitor instead of going to the bar. I thought at the time that I wanted to do crime, and so I applied and was fortunate enough to get a training contract with a huge criminal firm in London. I quickly discovered that crime was not for me. I thought I was going to be dealing with some big, exciting miscarriage of justice cases, but instead I found I was representing teenage boys who'd vandalized bus shelters or stolen bicycles. I soon realized that I wasn't interested in criminal law, but discovered that I was very interested in family law. I think family law is an area, if you are interested in people's stories, family law is definitely an area worth exploring. I had gone through law school in order to get my solicitor's finals before doing my training contract. But the process at that time was that you had to apply for a training contract before you went to law school. So it was all a bit upside down, which is again, very similar to the process now. That said, I think it's important to recognise that I thought I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. I thought I wanted to be a solicitor, but actually I then moved on. I qualified as a solicitor in 1994 and specialised in family law. I then went on to become a children panel member for the Law Society, which was a specialist in doing children proceedings. With that came a lot of advocacy, and I found that I was in court on an almost daily basis. And that was where I discovered my passion for advocacy. I really enjoyed court work. I really enjoyed going to court and representing different members of families in family cases. Having discovered that, excuse me, I decided to revisit the possibility of going to the bar. I was much more confident by this time because I'd established a career and I'd established a specialism. And so I applied to a local chambers in Sheffield. Because I was known as a practitioner in Sheffield, I think it was a bit easier for me to get a place in chambers. And I then applied to Inner Temple to be admitted to the bar. The Bar Council granted me exemption from doing a pupillage because I'd been a practicing lawyer for so long. But I did have to come and eat dinners in London, which I found to be a fairly pointless exercise at the time. I'm really pleased that that's something that has moved on with the times, and you no longer have to come and eat dinner, but you will actually do some qualifying sessions that will be, I think, educational and informative. Within my chambers, I was involved in pupillage interviews and in the sifting process to look at people to look at who should be offered a pupillage. As Jess has said, it was then and it remains now an extremely competitive process. I think a lot will depend on the type of chambers that you apply to. In Sheffield, my chambers was a common law practice, but we generally looked for people that had done something a little bit different. We didn't interview anybody that had less than a 2-1 in their degree, but once they had crossed that, once they'd passed that criteria, I in particular was very interested in people that had done something a bit different or had succeeded despite adversity. I think work experience is really important, but as Jess said, I don't think it necessarily needs to be legal experience. I think showing that you can demonstrate commitment and resilience, perhaps whilst holding down a job and studying at the same time, will be a really good indicator that you have what it may take to become a barrister. I think mini pupillages are a really good idea, but if you are applying for mini pupillages, can I please urge you to research the chambers that you're applying to? We had many people apply to our chambers who didn't appear to know what circuit we were on or expressed an interest in a particular area of law that my chambers didn't practice in. So it was clear that people were just doing a scattergun approach, and those applications didn't get very far. I loved my time at the bar. I think it was the most interesting job I've ever done. I really enjoyed my time in practice. But in 2012, I decided to give sitting a go, and I applied to become a recorder. That was the first year that you were able to apply for specialist recorder posts. So you didn't have to sit in crime, but you could sit in family only, which was, of course, my area of preference and expertise. I was really lucky to be appointed through that process and found I enjoyed sitting as a judge very much. And so in 2014, I applied to do the job full time. And that is where I am now. It's been a fantastically varied career, but I hope that what my career demonstrates is that if you're not particularly sure about what you want to do or what area you want to go into, there are plenty of opportunities along the way to explore different avenues. And I think that the law itself offers you so many different opportunities, some of which you're going to hear from now from the other panel members. So that's my journey in a nutshell. I'll hand over now to Claire because she's the next person I can see on the screen, and she will tell you about her journey to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. So hello, good evening, everybody. We've just had Eurovision. You know, I can say I'm coming to you tonight from Brussels. I am an employed barrister. I work for the EFTA Surveillance Authority, which is a little bit like the European Commission. And I'm in their legal service, and I do their court work before the European Court of Justice and the EFTA Court in Luxembourg. I'm dealing really essentially with cases which come from the national courts, so the UK before Brexit, from the different EU and European Economic Area countries, but also types of cases where the authority, decision adopted by the authority is being challenged or won by the European Commission, and we would intervene in support. And in terms of how did I get here? So I studied law at Edinburgh University. I did law and French, and then a master's degree in European law. I always knew somehow that I was interested in language, in a bit of drama, in storytelling. So law seemed like quite a sort of obvious place for me to go, although I did very much also enjoy science while I was at school. But I think law seemed to be a more obvious career path. So after studying at Edinburgh, I mean, I knew by this point that I wanted to go to the bar. I'd always suspected that. I took part in some mooting, debating type competitions while at Edinburgh. And I sort of, being young and ambitious and wanting to specialize immediately, I identified that the English bar would be better for me than the Scots bar, because there's an ability really to specialize in a particular field of interest earlier on than in Scotland, where I would also typically need to practice as a solicitor first. So, and the areas that I had identified as of interest at that time were actually tax law, which you need to study in Scotland to get a law degree anyway, and European law. And why did I like tax, of all things? People often think it's very dry, but in fact, tax really gets everywhere. So, you know, you end up with all different types of legal problems, from things where you have your local chip shop and it's VAT, to some multinational companies, to actors and so on. And I like this precise area, this sort of precision of tax and getting everywhere. And in contrast, enjoyed the kind of dynamism of EU law, where you have these very broad brush principles, and I quite like this kind of clash. And so, as I say, I kind of identified the English bar as my target. How did I get there? Well, I had a Scots law degree, so I needed to do a conversion course. At the time, I think it was called the CPE, the Common Professional Examination. And I had to do a couple of, I think, 3 courses there, tort law, English legal system, I think property law, or 4, sorry, criminal law. In terms of funding, I was able to do this on a part-time basis, while I was working at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. I sort of obtained work placement there, and did the bar conversion course at the same time. I, from memory, believe that I did manage to get money from Inner Temple to do that, a scholarship. So for that, and actually the bar school course itself, so the legal practice course. And I do remember preparing for those interviews quite thoroughly. And I actually sit now on the Inner Temple Scholarship committees the last couple of years. So I'd be very happy to answer questions about that process later on if you have questions. So I did the conversion course, did bar school, and applied to chambers. And I think for everybody, that was, it was quite difficult, as for everybody else, particularly because the way that the applications was set up, the automated applications, the Scots law degree, which is still quite close in many ways, and I had done 4 years of law, was classified as really a foreign law system. So that actually I found out later, excluded me from sort of certain types of chambers at the time. And I don't know if that has changed or made it very difficult for me to get my application sort of to the top of the pile. I did have a couple of different offers from tax chambers. Probably one of the reasons for that was that was perhaps quite unusual, particularly in the kind of English market, in the sense that I had tax law, already. I had done 1.5 years of tax law at university and a little bit in my master's. So I do think that that was something quite unusual and attractive to tax chambers. And so I practiced in tax chambers in London for about 8 years or so, indeed doing tax and EU law. And then I also, for family reasons, I was looking to move to Brussels. I worked for 11 years in-house for Euroclear, which is like a financial services, how can I say, in the financial services sector, a sort of huge, quite global operation. But I was missing advocacy. And that's when I saw this job at the EFTA Surveillance Authority, where despite me being still an employed barrister, I actually do more litigation than when I was at the independent bar, the self-employed bar in chambers. So in tax chambers, there's not that much court work, whereas where I am now, there really is quite a lot. I'm just thinking in terms of pupillage, as I mentioned, for me, I think a good point was having had tax law on my CV, and also a number of pupillages, many pupillages, I should say, and other types of work experience. I couldn't agree more with Jess and Jessica that it's not necessary it helps obviously to have some sort of legal experience or exposure, because it does, how can I say, it does fit with the story or your expressed desire to go into law. You've seen a little bit more than indeed perhaps some television programs or series, but I don't think it's fatal if you haven't had any legal work experience. And in terms of pupillage, it's quite a long time ago, but while I was in chambers, I was the head of the pupillage selection committee. And in terms of the academic level that Jessica mentioned, I think we did exceptionally once take a candidate right through to the final round who had a 2-2, but who seemed to be exceptional in many other ways, and was also very articulate in person. We tended to have try to have a wider number of people in the first sort of round of physical interviews. And in that interview, she was really stellar. And so we kept her sort of right through to the end. Just perhaps before allowing Emily to say a few things, Jess and Jessica have touched on perseverance and not giving up, and I would absolutely agree that that's quite important, that you do need to have faith in yourself, and if it's something that you're really committed to keep trying. I mean, just to give an example, for the Inns of Court School of Law, which was the vocational course, I was turned down for a place, and actually at that time that did matter. There were not so many places, and on questioning and going back again, found out, for example, that was just simply a mistake. Now that's not always the case, but it's one of those things where if I had given up at the time, things might have turned out really sort of very differently. So I think that's really perhaps it for me for now. I don't know if anybody else is out there still. Yes, Emily, there you are. So perhaps over to you. And I'm very happy, if anybody's got any questions, please put them in the chat. And I understand that in a bit we perhaps have more chance for Q&A. So happy to answer any questions there.
Thanks, Claire. Good evening, everybody. I'm Emily Carman. I currently practice in criminal law. I'm at a Chambers based in Manchester, but we also are in Sheffield, Liverpool and Chester. That means that sometimes I travel about a bit, but fortunately my clerks look after me and I'm mostly in Manchester. I came to the bar quite similar to Jessica, in that I was a solicitor first. So just in terms of education, because I've seen a question about the state school being a barrier. I was state school educated. My Lancashire accent might give that away. And I did okay in my GCSEs, nothing particularly exceptional, but okay. Then went on to do my A-levels. I did politics, music and English combined. Again, did okay. Nothing exceptional in my A-levels. And then I went on to do a law degree. I got a 2-1 in my law degree. And whilst I was doing my law degree, what I did was I made sure I did plenty of work experience. I am fortunate to have a relative in the legal profession who works in criminal law. He did not want me to go anywhere near the criminal law side of things. He said, "You'll have no life, and you won't get paid enough." So he did all he could to try and steer me away from it. So work experience at all different areas of law, but unfortunately, it was always the criminal law work experience that I enjoyed the most. And so during my LLB, I was deciding what route to go down and made the decision to do what was the legal practice course. Now, I'm not sure if you can still do that or it's all entirely moved to the SQE now, but I decided to go down the solicitor route. I was very fortunate, and this is one of the reasons why I was glad I went down the solicitor route, that I ended up going into a training contract as pretty much as soon as I'd finished the LPC. So during my training contracts, I did criminal, I did prison law, I did a bit of extradition. And I was also able to go to the police station, which looking back now, that stood me in such good stead for now whilst I'm a barrister, because if you can deal with somebody at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning at the police station, you can deal with somebody at the Crown Court when they've already got used to the fact that they're going through this terrible time in their life. So being a solicitor is greatly helped me, I think, in terms of dealing with the client. I was a solicitor advocate because I was able to get my higher rights whilst doing my training contract for about 4.5 years. I started itching a little bit around the 3.5 year mark. I found being a solicitor was very rewarding. I was in court most days. However, after court, I was having to come back and I was having to time record. I was having to do audits with the partners of the firm. And I just thought, that's going to be me in 20 years if I hang around here. And I'm not going to be going to court. I'm not going to be able to do what I love, which is going down to the police station or going down to the courts and doing trials. So I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm going to get stuck in this, and I might not be able to get out. So I made the decision to come back to Manchester, because I was then practicing over in Yorkshire. And I went freelance solicitor because I thought, if this is where I want to be based, I'm going to start getting some work whilst I go and apply to the BSB. So I applied for a exemption from pupillage, an exemption from the education part of the qualification route to be a barrister. It took quite a while to get an answer. It took a lot of references, and again, I can't thank both the Inner Temple and also colleagues at the bar and solicitor colleagues for the amount of assistance there was with that application. So a good support network is definitely a very good thing in this profession. But I was able to get full exemption from all parts. That resulted in me then getting called to the bar in November of 2023. And because of the connections that I've made in Manchester, and the good friends and the good colleagues I've made, I was able to talk to my chambers that I'm now in, and I was able to get an interview. Now, it was no walk in the park for me just because I knew these people. I still had to do an advocacy assessment, still had to go in front of 5 people and tell them why I thought they should give me a chance. But fortunately, I got into a very, very good chambers, and they've been very supportive. What they did ask of me was that I do a probationary tenancy, and I know that is quite a popular thing for people who are transferring across. I know a few people that have recently done it, just because, especially in the criminal law world, the solicitors, criminal solicitors, have it real tough. So there's a lot of people at the minute considering their position. And chambers, especially in the criminal field, I can't really comment on the other areas, but they are very open to transferring solicitors and other legal professionals, because one of the things I could do and say in my interview is, well, I've got some work to bring with me. People will instruct me because they know I do a good job. And they know that I can deal with clients. And they also know that I know their job. So I know how to make it easier for them. If they need a document and they need an advice that's going to assist them in getting funding, then I'll give it to them and there'll be no questions asked. So I get a lot of my work because I used to be a solicitor. So it is really a rewarding career. Talking about losses, last night I spent about 4.5 hours on 2 different legal arguments, and neither of them won today. So you do have to be resilient. In all areas, you have to be ready for some late nights and some early mornings. It's a very hard profession. You have to make sacrifices, but it's totally worth it. It's the best move that I ever made, and I honestly couldn't encourage more people to do the transition. But it's not that it's easier. It's certainly not. But if you love doing advocacy and you love helping people in whatever area it might be, it truly is the profession for you, and it will reward you. Don't listen to what people say about criminal law. It can pay, but you've got to work at it. So yeah, that was my journey. It's still very early on, but yeah, definitely the best decision I ever made.
Great, thanks guys. So that is actually our whole panel. Philip now can't make it, unfortunately. But I think a real sort of great inputs from all of you, quite different sort of journeys, and ended up in different places as well. So I'm going to pick out some questions from the Q&A box for us to cover. So one on kind of practice area, in terms of sort of how do you know when you actually really enjoy an area of law?
Can I start with that?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was struck when Emily was talking. One of the things that made me clear that I didn't want to practice in crime was not only the boys stealing bicycles and vandalizing bus shelters, but it was going to police stations in the middle of the night. I think you need to try things and see what interests you, and then try it in practice. As I said, I thought crime was the area for me. Once I got into practicing it, I realized that actually I wasn't that interested in it, and I was much more interested in people's stories. And so that encouraged me to move over and start specializing in family rather than crime. And also so that I could avoid going to police stations in the middle of the night. But Emily is entirely right. If you can go to a police station and deal with somebody that's drunk or aggressive in a police cell, then you're showing your resilience very early on.
Yeah, I think it's I also noted that question too, and which I think is a good question. And in some ways, how do you know, and also how do you know, and what should you be looking for? And because I remember that I at a certain point did quite a lot of competition law in my studies, and I just didn't really like it. And then now I do quite a lot of that field of law, and I do. And like, what's the difference? And I think it's just because in the interim, I've had experience of, working with companies, working in a company, working with businesses, working, and it just gives you a whole different level of interest. But it can be surprising, and I agree it's good to try, because just now what I do is really very varied, because EU law covers I do cases which cover patients' rights, or maternity or paternity leave, or money laundering, or so it's very diverse, and I think probably part of it is just that it's actually a real life problem as well. That gives that sometimes gives a surprising interest, whereas academically you maybe didn't enjoy it quite so much.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I do think that is like a good kind of point to emphasize, and something that comes up pretty much in every panel that I do. Is kind of like, I hated this at uni, I love it now, or I loved it at uni and then I did it and was like, this is rubbish actually. So it is a little bit of kind of trial and error, and things aren't necessarily how they are in textbooks and law reports when you actually get to practicing it, which can be difficult, because I definitely think there is more of a pressure now on incoming barristers to pick a practice area, and then the idea is that you would stick to it, whereas again, something that comes up on most of my panels is that the practice area that people went into is not necessarily the practice area they're in now. And so it's difficult to kind of balance that you, when you apply to chambers for a mini pupillage or for pupillage, you should have an interest in their area of work. But to then, for example, these days, throw all your eggs into tax or shipping, or one specific type of crime, you might not have as much success because you don't have as many chambers to apply to when it comes down to it. So it's sort of that fine balancing act of yeah, being specialist but not too specialist, and also open to change as well. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure when you're 20, 21, whatever, right? Here, pick your job now for the rest of your life. And the practice area pressure sometimes comes with that. So yeah, thank you for that, guys. Right, I'll have a look for our next question. Bit of a change of topic. What do you think makes a good barrister? Maybe if you pick out maybe one or two kind of characteristics or skills that you think make a really good barrister.
Emily, do you want to take that one
Yeah, I'll
first?
go for that. Sorry. Perhaps being able to find the mute and unmute button is one of the skills. I think that being able to empathize with a person's situation is really important, because if you can't at least be able to consider what they must be feeling like at that moment, then you're not going to be very good at your job, and you're going to be quite impatient with your client. Ultimately, you've got to do the best by them, and so having just a little bit of humanity, which is sometimes hard, especially if you're dealing with multiple cases throughout the day. You're stressed out, you've got judges waiting for you. But just taking a moment and thinking, no, actually, this is a really big deal in their life. And just being able to just take a breath in your busy day, to empathize with them, and just give them a bit of humanity through what they're going through.
Can I just go back? I think that's a really good point, but I think again it will depend on the area of law you go into, because if you are going to choose an area in which people are the litigants, are the subjects, then yes, you will need empathy. You will need to be able to talk to people and sympathise with their situation. But Claire's area is probably gives a different skill set, or demands a different skill set. Would you agree, Claire?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do recognize the sort of people person part of Emily, Emily's description, and I do agree it's very important. But the first thing that sprung to my mind was the word rigor. And so really having that, I think over time, like a good barrister, I see this as a good barrister over a period of time. And I think it's really important, almost like on a day in, day out basis, to remind yourself to kind of go to the bottom, to go to the end of things, to not cut corners, to do your research properly, to not sort of, if I put it another way, not to be lazy. Sometimes there are these moments where you're tired, you've got a lot to do, you've got a lot of evidence to get through, there's a lot of things to draft, there are competing demands, and it's that commitment actually to quality, quality and rigor. I think it's really important, and that I think that goes for across all of the different sectors. It's sort of a repeated commitment to do it properly, to do it well. I think that's key.
Great, thanks, guys. So there's a sort of tongue-in-cheek question in here, although I'm going to, broaden it out. So someone's asked, how much did the wigs cost? And so I can Google that, but what I sort of want us to speak about a little bit more, and kind of, Emily touched on it, is that kind of, I suppose, the financial aspect, particularly thinking about early on in a career at the bar. Emily says crime does pay, etc. And so maybe kind of thinking about that, how do you balance, for example, all of the travel costs that you're incurring, as well as those kinds of late nights, and presumably, right, you're not cooking for yourself, and it has all of that kind of impact. So I don't know if anyone can kind of speak to that. Finances at an early stage.
I can take this. I bought my wig in November 2023. It was £600, which is extortionate. But unfortunately, you need a wig, and you can give your accountant it as well, the receipt. Keep hold of every receipt is my biggest piece of advice. It is a costly process, especially when you start up, because you're trying to get as much work possible, and that's where having a really supportive chambers and clerk system around you really helps. But what I would say is, as long as you're willing to put the effort and the work in, it is rewarding. You've got to be organised. I got told straight off, 50% of your earnings, you need to put it to the side. Don't be spending it because it's not yours. And it is a bit of a wake-up call, especially for me, because I was in private practice, having to pay in advance your tax, having to pay your VAT. I have to say, I've never had so much money go into my bank account, but on the other hand, I've also never had so much money go out my bank account. So you do have to be organised. You need an accountant. I would say don't try and do it because it's just stressful to try and sort it out yourself. But that's one of the benefits of being in the employed bar, I suppose, that you've got somebody doing that, and you know that all the money is going into you. But just be organised is my biggest piece of advice in relation to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I when I got my wig, which was in 99, it was £400. So I think we can all invest in the wig sector. You know, it's not too bad a rate of return. I mean, I came straight to the, you know, I hadn't worked at all before coming to the bar, and I come from a family background where, you know, I couldn't look for anybody to support me, you know, other than potentially pretty short term. So it was definitely a concern for me. Although I think if you are organized and quite frugal, you know, so not overspending at the beginning, it is, yeah, it is surprising when you're earning that money for yourself, you know, how you can actually, particularly if you're just comparing it with student life, you know, you can actually get by. And interestingly, when I was looking at there were two, I was very fortunate. I had two good pupillage offers on the table, but they were vastly differing in terms of the amount of money. And the chambers that I actually wanted to go to, preferred, I felt they were more, how can I say, diverse group of people. The amount that, yeah, we're offering was half. And luckily, I had a friend who's still a great friend today, from made through bar school, who said to me, "Look, Claire, go and talk to them, you know, and just tell them that, you know, go in person." You know, I'd prepared a little letter with all the stuff, you know, explaining why. And anyway, long story short, I went and I explained to them and my situation, and said financially the difference is just too huge, you know, and also for me or my family. And they sort of split the difference. So they went away and they had a chat and they came back. And at the time it was 6,000 extra, which was, even today, is still quite a significant amount of money. So yeah, there can, the financial issues are indeed very real. And it's true that I was at bar school with people who racked up huge debts and didn't get pupillage. So I do think it is also be good to be, you know, while we're saying, you know, go for it and stick to it and persevere, but you do need to be realistic about the costs of potentially going down this route, and the, you know, the fact that it is indeed very competitive. So you perhaps have, you know, maybe some alternative paths mapped out if should pupillage not be successful for you.
Great, thanks guys. Jessica, anything to add? Or?
No, I think it's all been covered. I agree with all that's been said.
Cool, great, thanks guys. Yes, agree on the accountant bit. When I go to pupillage fairs as like representing the Inns of Court, there's usually like a couple of accountants, sort of firms, they call them firms, who are there like specifically, their whole thing is barristers. Like that's their whole thing. Like, you know, getting a mortgage as a self-employed barrister, for example, right? That is a very specific kind of support that you need. So like that kind of support is really helpful. And yeah, just one of those things that is pretty much necessary. Cool. So in terms of questions, I've got a question here sort of asking, is it a career foul to not be based in London? Are the best legal opportunities, and best in quotation marks, in London or South East England?
No. In short, there's some very good chambers all over the country: Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield. Yeah, I don't think it's a problem to not be based in London.
Well, I'm based in Brussels, and I'm appearing against some, all the time senior silks who are in London. So you don't need to be in. It's certainly my case anyway in London to be, doing some decent cases either. So yeah.
I agree. You absolutely don't need to be in London. And in fact, there's often London silks coming up to Manchester and doing big murders and whatnot. So it's not a bar for brilliant opportunities being on any other circuit.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. The only thing I would add is around practice area in terms of kind of particularly commercial and chancery law. It's not that you can't do it on other circuits, just that some of the particular specialist sets are based in London. But lots of those practitioners won't even necessarily live in London anymore. So yeah, don't be too worried about it. Some people will say, apply to chambers like for pupillage kind of on circuit because you might have a better chance, because perhaps they're less popular. And I would just kind of say that those chambers do value a connection to the local area. Also, I have been told, not necessarily that you're from there, but that you have actually lived there before. Perhaps the kind of work that you're going to get, that there is some sort of connection to practicing in that area, as opposed to just, I thought I might have better luck in Sheffield than London. That's not really going to fly. So yeah, when you're thinking about targeting chambers, it's not just practice area, what kind of cases, but yeah, it's also like, well, what's the area? Like Jessica, I think, said earlier, people applying who didn't even know what circuit they practiced on. That's not necessarily going to fly. Cool. So just looking through the questions. Sorry, I was listening too hard to you guys, and now I haven't read the questions. Someone's asked about kind of imposter syndrome, particularly, not taking kind of necessarily the traditional route, and ever kind of second guessing yourself. Would anybody like to speak on that?
I saw that and it made me smile. I have imposter syndrome every day. I have dreams where I have to remind myself, no, you're the judge now. It's fine.
Yeah, I have it every day too. It's not everybody around you, it's just what's inside your head that you've got to get past. But you wouldn't be there if you weren't good enough. Is what I try to tell myself.
Yes, I mean, I'm just looking for the actual phrase. Yes, I see it now, the imposter syndrome. Yeah, I mean, I'm almost, you could say, a reverse imposter, in the sense that I started off very traditional bar route, as in coming into London chambers, and then I worked in-house while I'm still an employed barrister. So I have sort of almost have this where I do sometimes feel this judgment of self-employed traditional bar versus barristers who work in employed practice, as if we don't know our way around a courtroom. So I have a little bit sometimes that, as in like, well, am I still a real barrister at all, because I'm not sitting in a chambers. So yeah, I think we have, voila, the answer is we all have it, suffer from it. It's not going to change.
Just to add to that, tomorrow, incidentally, I'm prosecuting somebody that I used to instruct when I was a solicitor, and I've just sent them a document to just check, and I'm sat here worried sick.
I think everybody with a high stakes job, if they aren't an egomaniac, have imposter syndrome. I think that's just how we live in the world, right? We want to do a good job, and so we worry that we aren't going to do a good job. And I think that's human. I think that means that you produce good work, as long as it's not ruining your life, right, and not keeping you up at night. I think it's probably a good sign. It means you care about your job, and you're doing important work. So yeah, that is, I think, sometimes a good thing. It's losing that sense of imposter syndrome. Maybe that means it's time to move on. Who knows? Okay, so we've got kind of a few questions sort of around additional experience, like things like mooting, or just people who have care and responsibilities and they're studying and maybe they are having to work just to make ends meet. in terms of how do you kind of gather that additional experience, and what additional experience people would perhaps recommend over others? It's not a very focused question, sorry. Yeah, I just wonder if anyone wants to kind of speak on the kinds of experience that you would recommend, like pro bono or whatever, and what you think is perhaps a must get.
Can I come back on that? I saw some of those questions, and I also saw the question about balancing caring responsibilities. And so I think there's two parts. The first is certainly when I was on the pupillage committee at my chambers, demonstrating that you'd had caring responsibilities and being able to study for a degree at the same time would be really good experience to show. We had a lot of people that had volunteered on death row, a lot of people. So doing something different, not necessarily going down traditional routes, not doing the legal routes, but in terms of having caring responsibilities, I think I would say that I had fairly young children when I transferred to the bar, and it is not an easy job to do with children. I was lucky that I have a husband who is a teacher, so he was available for school holidays, but your hours can be very long, and sometimes you will get stuck in court. And I found that I used to invite my children's friends over for tea after school, and then I'd discover that I couldn't pick up not only my own children, but somebody else's children as well. So that was always very stressful. So a word of caution that I think you will need support from other family members or friends if you want to attempt a career at the bar and care for young children or have other caring responsibilities. It is difficult.
Yes, I think that's right. I think though, and I was speaking to somebody the other week who was indeed in this at university stage and had a young child and was trying to indeed, as you said, Jess, get experience of, how do you get extracurricular activities to demonstrate interest, commitment to the bar, and the fact that already you can juggle your degree, with a degree of success, and shows that you're extremely organized, self-discipline, you're committed. And I think that can sort of make up is the wrong word, because it sounds like then there's a deficiency if you don't have some speaking experience. But I think, that someone or any chambers or potential, place for pupillage worth their salt would, I hope, look at the application in the round, and say that, well, yes, there's maybe a bit less of some of these fancy, debating things, but you can see that this person, through their written application is demonstrating their advocacy, has maybe, if there is some way to, you mentioned like pro bono or some sort of clinic or something like that, you can, but it's very difficult to do these things if already you're struggling with just, doing your law degree or your conversion and balancing the caring responsibilities. So I think really the message has to be, you just do what you can and maybe try to seek out some more unconventional, experience. Yeah.
On the topic of sort of, unconventional experience, that you could perhaps kind of fit around other things, I think people perhaps underestimate just like reading and listening to podcasts and reading around kind of various different areas, reading law reports, reading case law. It's obviously we already had this discussion around what's different in practice to kind of what's written down, but reading texts on advocacy and public speaking and that kind of thing, sometimes that can still help, and it shows that level of kind of dedication. You can read a chapter in between different things, right, while you're traveling from place to place, for example, that doesn't necessarily require, look, I need to somehow give up a whole day of my life to go and do a mini pupillage somewhere. So kind of thinking a little bit more creatively about that. A lot of the time, in terms of kind of scholarship interviews, sometimes it's not clear that an applicant really knows what the job is going to be like, and that is really important, right? To know what it is you're getting yourself into, because then that's the best way you can demonstrate, like, yeah, I would be really good at this. And so taking the time to kind of understand how it all works, that is broadly what a mini pupillage is giving you, is like, okay, what happens here at this workplace. And so trying to find other ways, like webinars like this, like webinars that the other Inns of Court do, is a good way to kind of demonstrate that interest and that motivation. And then, yeah, thinking creatively about how you might demonstrate your advocacy potential. If you have young children, you take them to the doctor, right? You tell the doctor what it is that you think might perhaps be wrong with them. You're describing symptoms. You are advocating for them. A young child can't necessarily speak for themselves, and so how do you kind of adopt that position, right? It's just, yeah, it's about thinking creatively about the experience and skills that you bring. Thanks, guys.
Sorry,
yeah.
just on that, a thought occurred to me. It's a very obvious one, but it's something that does come up sometimes in the scholarship interviews as well, is that, you know, you can always go to court. You've got public hearings, you've got also hearings which are live streamed, you know, nowadays, so you can find out, you know, do a bit of Googling, find out what's happening in the different courts that you might be interested in, or the types of advocacy, you know, look at the listing of the court, you know, and see what you can, even in your lunch break, or maybe lunch breaks are bad, both actually, but see what you can maybe listen into, because that sometimes has gone down, you know, quite well, where the candidate credibly can show that they actually are interested and they've been listening in to lots of different, you know, hearings, and they've discovered this and that. You know, because that's just like a mini pupillage, isn't it? To some degree, you spend your day, you know, sometimes in court, and you don't have much interaction otherwise, depending on how busy the barrister is. So, you know, you can at least sort of absorb some of that, you know, mini pupillage type experience just by, you know, through your screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to a court, observing hearings, yeah, online or otherwise, it's definitely something that we would recommend. If you're getting to a scholarship interview stage and you've never been to court, you know, if that's gonna probably where you're going to spend most of your job, like, yeah, it's kind of an own goal, really. So yeah, do think about that. We've got a question here around kind of A-level results and whether they matter much in the pupillage selection process. I don't know if anyone, perhaps Jessica, Claire, you know, you can speak to that as to whether or not you think those have an impact in your experience.
They possibly would have. There's another question as well about is it an absolute bar to being interviewed if you haven't got a 2-1? And I know Claire talked a little bit about that. I can remember we did interview a couple of people that didn't have the requisite 2-1, and perhaps we would have looked at A-level results then, particularly if they'd had difficulties during their degree course. I remember we interviewed somebody who'd had a serious bereavement during their degree course, and I think we did then look at A-level results and were prepared to interview them despite the fact they didn't have a 2-1. But similarly, if somebody's got a good degree, I don't think the A-level results then would be all that relevant. I don't know if Claire and Emily have a different experience. It's quite a long time since I've been on the pupillage committee, but in my view, then they're not all that relevant. If you've gone on to get a degree, they may be relevant if you had problems during your degree.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's, you know, where is the person now, you know, and often if you see then a very positive evolution, the fact that your school didn't go so well, you know, doesn't really matter. I mean, you know, what you're studying at school there are different subjects. I mean, well, sorry, you mentioned that you had A-level, I think law. No, you said, or is that an opportunity? But normally you're not studying law, you know, at school. So the fact that, you know, you don't do so well in chemistry is perhaps in the end not so important if you can demonstrate, you know, later on in your university or legal or college studies, you know, that those are going well.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And just to say on the kind of sort of mitigating circumstances front. So if you apply for a scholarship with Inner Temple, and I'm fairly sure it's the same across the Inns, there is a chance where you can kind of write about any mitigating circumstances, which is the term that we use for things like a bereavement or illness or other reason that you think that your performance at university or otherwise was impacted by something else, and you think, actually, no, a 2-2 is not an accurate reflection. If I hadn't experienced X, Y, Z, then I would have got a 2-1 or a first. And so there is an opportunity to give us that information when you apply for a scholarship. And I'd really encourage you to use that box, because it does provide the panel with some context for the grades that you've achieved, and they do adjust the academic score accordingly based on those mitigating circumstances. So please, I know it can feel awkward to fill that in, but we would definitely encourage you to use it. We wouldn't give you the opportunity to if we didn't even look at it. So yeah, please do that. Cool. Okay, thanks guys. Just someone asked, like, yeah, does having a 2-2 impact getting pupillage? And like the statistics say yes, and so that is just something that we do kind of have to say. So I've seen someone has just asked if you had to repeat a year as an undergraduate, but you got a 2-1, how long you take to complete your degree. I don't think people are paying that much attention to. Yeah, there are lots of reasons why someone might repeat a year, and it might be that you have to kind of interrupt for various other reasons. Ultimately, you got a 2-1 in the end, right? So yeah, that's kind of what matters. Cool. So just in terms of questions, still a few kind of money questions kicking about. So someone asked, now I'm struggling to find it, around the kind of the pupillage award, or that kind of year salary. Is that generally indicative of your earnings once qualified? So if your pupillage, yeah, I mean, people are shaking their heads. Go for it, Emily. Yeah, Claire, Jessica, whoever, go for it.
I think it depends on the set you're in and what work and opportunities you have. It's so difficult to say. I know that the last pupil in our set has done really, really well. But that's because they're working really hard and they get the opportunities. So it's really difficult to say a definite yes or no on that one.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I do think that generally, at least when I was doing pupillage, it was like 99 onwards. Sorry, pupil 99, around about then anyway. But I mean, most of the awards were quite low, for all of the sets. Like even in the big fancy chambers, you'd maybe get 25,000, 30,000. Maybe somebody was 40, but I know that's still a reasonable amount, of course, but that was really the top level. Whereas I think now they have gone up further. But I do think generally that I do think often that the pupillage awards are a bit less actually than you might expect to earn. And certainly that was the case for me. And when Emily mentioned opportunity, that's also quite important too. There's always an element of luck, isn't there? And I was very lucky. I got some smaller pieces of work, but a big case where I also had an hourly rate. And even though the hourly rate wasn't huge, I did lots of hours. And then, that you end up being much better off than you thought you possibly could be. So a bit of luck too.
Yeah, just to kind of also put the pupillage award kind of into context, some of the reason why it varies so much, yeah, there's a minimum wage basically for pupillage awards now. There didn't used to be. That's a relatively new thing. They used to be completely unpaid. It wasn't compulsory that they were paid. That's how far it's kind of come in 25, 30 years. But the pupillage award is made up of money from the members of that chambers. So they, that's their money going towards that as part of kind of their sort of chambers fees. And sometimes specialist bar associations will kind of top up that amount, but that's where that money kind of comes from. And so that's kind of why in some cases you might think, oh, well, that looks a little low. That's odd. It's not because they don't necessarily value you. It's because that money is coming from them. So that is kind of important to bear in mind. And someone has asked specifically around financial support for pupils, and just from an in perspective, I'll just touch on that. So some chambers, as part of their pupillage kind of offer, may well reimburse for travel expenses. So that is worth looking into. They will usually mention that on their website or as part of their kind of pupillage information. Not everyone will do it, but some will. And then on sort of secondary to that, the Inn also does offer pupillage awards. And so those are open to people who have a minimally funded pupillage, so basically minimum wage, so at the lower end, and that's sort of awards of around sort of £1,000 or £2,000 to try and sort of top up that minimum award, because if you are living in London or practicing in London, £24,000 is not enough to live on, and so that is kind of designed there. So that is also an important thing to bear in mind, that financial support is available from your Inn of Court, and then we also have a hardship fund as well. So if you sort of realise partway through the year you're like, hang on a minute, I actually can't get to this court because of XYZ. Yeah, that is important to bear in mind. And then thirdly, if you have a disability or other condition that kind of impacts how costly it is for you to live or travel to work, you can try and get funding via Access to Work. So that is kind of important to consider. You can also currently do that through the INS Disability Awards as well, although we are kind of changing some of that criteria in future years because you can access to work payments. So there are lots of kind of different things kind of kicking around that can hopefully sort of top up some of that funding. Right, so just kind of time to look through some of these questions. So someone's asked around kind of, how do you know what circuit is best for you? How do you decide which circuit you prefer, and what are some factors to consider? I don't know, Emily, did you ever consider not practicing where you practice now?
No, because I've got a support network this way. I also already had a professional network too. So it was always going to be the Northern Circuit. But what I would say is, just because you're a member of the Northern Circuit, it doesn't mean that you're not going to end up working other places. I often go over to Leeds. Today I've been in Shrewsbury. So it doesn't mean that you're just going to be staying put in court centres on your circuit. I think that's where mini pupillages help, because you can kind of get a feel as to the type of atmosphere that the different circuits have. Most people are really lovely wherever you go, though, I find, and you already know who to steer clear of because everyone else is steering clear of them. So yeah, go where the opportunity takes you initially. You've got to grab it.
Can I just come in? I would agree. I think where do you want to live, or where do you live if you're already established somewhere, and what area of law do you want to go into? So unless you are looking at a particularly specialist area that is only in London, I think look for chambers that offer you the type of pupillage that you would like, and look for where you want to live. If you have no ties and commitments, the world is your oyster.
Great, thanks, guys. Someone's asked about kind of neurodiversity at the bar. Obviously, none of our panelists has kind of mentioned it themselves. I don't know if anybody would like to comment on that. Yeah, in terms of kind of neurodiversity being a barrier to practicing at the bar. If no one has anything to add, I can talk about it because I've heard other panelists talk about it.
I'll defer to you, Jess. I mean, I would say I think it probably is more relevant to the area, type of chambers you go to, and the type of law that you want to practice. Yeah, I'll defer to you.
Cool, no worries. So yeah, just kind of, I suppose, to speak as to how other panelists, so practicing barristers have kind of spoken about it before. They certainly don't see it as a barrister if they themselves are neurodivergent, or have, for example, pupils who are. I think one of the main things really is to think really carefully. I think this applies to any job, is what you need in order to succeed in a job, and that's not necessarily just what support do you need from around you, but what kind of coping mechanisms can you yourself put in place. If you say to an employer, I'm autistic, and then you end it there, And you don't necessarily say, and so this means that I need information in a certain format. I prefer to read things than receive kind of instruction verbally, or I need kind of set meeting times that they aren't moved at short notice, or these kinds of things. It is really important to be able to like advocate for the support that you need, and so you shouldn't necessarily see that as kind of something that is going to stop you from pursuing a career at the bar. And what I would say is that if you are worried perhaps about applying to a certain chambers and thinking, oh, I don't know if they're going to cater to my needs, I don't know if they're going to support me, I would suggest that that's probably not a place you want to work anyway. And so, yeah, you want to feel supported at work, and being in a toxic work environment is going to be helpful to you, whether or not it's because of neurodiversity or anything else. So yeah, it's certainly something that you can ask chambers about, find around pupillage interviews or something like that. They're not just interviewing you, you're interviewing them. If you get to that stage, that you're probably in demand and you might have more than one offer on the table. And so, yeah, it's sometimes joining chambers is a lifetime commitment. Some people will practice there for their entire careers, and you want to make sure that it's a really good fit. And so I think perhaps trying to kind of reframe it, as opposed to what barriers are going to be put before me. It's sort of, well, what am I going to do to kind of open those doors and make sure that people are catering to my needs and supporting me in the way that I need, and how am I going to support myself as well? Certainly, if you're a university student, I'd encourage you to try and develop those techniques and coping strategies now, while you're in what is a relatively safe environment, and speak to your university kind of study support skills teams, careers teams, about what it is that you can do to kind of better your chances in the workplace. But yeah, broadly speaking, some of my panelists in the past have kind of said, like, actually, like, my ADHD is an advantage, right? I hope hyper focus on this thing. I can read massive amounts of papers in one go. That helps if it's something that you fancy doing, and maybe it doesn't if you're more interested in doing something else rather than reading the papers you've just been given. But yeah, thinking about it in that way, I think it is what I would recommend. Yeah, so definitely kind of, yeah, look for the support that you think is going to help you, and try and be confident in asking for what you need as well. Just to say more generally on the sort of yeah, that element of kind of support, we ask as part of the scholarship interviews if there are any reasonable adjustments that you require at interview. Chambers should be asking that as well. I'm pretty sure that that's an Equality Act thing that they have to do. And yeah, use those boxes to ask for what it is that you need. If you need extra time for a task, perhaps you're having to do a reading or a written task as part of an interview, they should give you extra time if you got it at university. We ask for evidence, just like something from your disability support, maybe it's DSA or whatever. We ask for evidence, but yeah, like that's pretty standard. So please don't be afraid to kind of include that. Maybe you need an accessible room, whatever. We want you to put that information down. Yeah, as long as you're comfortable doing so. Oh, okay. So we've got kind of a question around like alternative experience in terms of like struggling to secure tenancy after pupillage. I don't know if anyone can kind of speak to that. Something I didn't talk about when I talked about pupillage, I mentioned a first six and a second six. I didn't mention a third six, which do exist, are fairly common. So sometimes after your year's pupillage, your chambers and maybe yourself are dithering as to whether or not to offer you tenancy, and so they would say, actually, we're going to offer you a third six, and that's just another 6 months to try and figure out if they do want to offer you tenancy. That might be at the chambers where you undertook pupillage, but it might also be at a different set. So after a year's pupillage, you might say, oh, actually, maybe this practice area is not for me, maybe this set in particular is not for me, maybe this area, like physically location, is not for me, and then someone might then ask you to do a third six. So Emily, I know you said that you did a probationary tenancy. Was that the same thing? Was it 6 months?
It was 12 months. And actually we've got somebody who did tenancy down in London, and I think it's very much a London thing. It's something that I'm part of the Young Criminal Bar Association, and it's something that we're actually speaking to those higher about, that those types of things are getting introduced more and more often now, especially in London. And I, I can see why in some instances it's better than people just not getting tenancy, at least they're being they're keeping on. But I think it is something that is being used a bit too often at the minute, and potentially taking advantage of the situation of people being desperate for that tenancy and desperate to stay in chambers. But it is certainly something that it is available. I know somebody who was in-house at the Crown Prosecution Service doing their pupillage, and they got tenancy with the chambers, but they had to do that third six, and it's worked out brilliantly for them. So it is something definitely that's been used, but also something that the younger members of the bar are keeping an eye on as well.
I would also say that it is less common than it once was. So back when pupillage wasn't paid or was paid at a very low rate, it was far more common for chambers to take on 10, 12 pupils. And then they would say this phrase, which you might still hear now, is that pupillage was like a year-long job interview, because there was only like one tenancy position. It is far less like that now, because chambers have to pay you. And so it much like a training contract, right? They want to keep you because they just paid for your training. And so that is part of what makes pupillage so competitive, is because they're not looking at you as a potential pupil, they're looking at you as a potential tenant. What if they spend 50 years here and we hate them and they're rubbish, right? Like that's not going to work. And so that's partly why the process is so grueling. So it's much more common. You'll see this on Chambers' website. They have 2 pupillage spots. Maybe they only have 1. Most websites will say that, yeah, we have a view to offer pupillage with a view to keep you on as a tenant. And you can kind of, if you're playing the long game, you can look at Chambers websites, right? Oh yeah, there's 2 pupils this year. Did they stay? You go back a year later, are they still on the website? Are they there as tenants? Did they stay? So some chambers will even say year on year, this is how many we offered pupillage to, who did pupillage, this is how many stayed on as tenants. You can be quite canny in terms of the stuff that you're researching to sort of give you an idea. So that is quite important to remember. Some statistics I looked at, which granted might be a few years out of date, it was something like 97% of people who finished pupillage were offered tenancy. It's much more common now, although as Emily said, obviously you do want to keep an eye on those places that are offering a lot of third sixes instead. Yeah, it also potentially speaks to a lack of work available. If they're a little bit anxious about taking on too many tenants, that they worry there's not enough work to go around. So that's something to consider as well. So yeah, you want to know who to steer clear of, basically, and that requires a lot of research. The actual specific question was around kind of specific career paths or jobs that people can do. To be honest, most of what I see is people asking, what can I do in between the bar course and pupillage, like to help me get pupillage, as opposed to what can I do between pupillage and tenancy, because the rates of people staying on are so high. So that's kind of more what I would have an awareness of. Things like a judicial assistant role, we see that quite a lot. Paralegal work, if you're trying again for pupillage, that kind of stuff, in the legal field, county court advocates, that kind of stuff, it is what I would say you would be looking into. Right. Cool. So just looking for another question. Okay, a little bit sort of lighter. Apart from perhaps advocacy, what's your favourite aspect of being a barrister, or was your favourite aspect of being a barrister?
I loved Chambers life. I loved being a part of a Chambers. I liked that sense of family. I still feel a part of my old Chambers even now, despite the fact I haven't been practicing at the bar for so many years. And I found that to be much greater as a barrister than it ever was as a solicitor. So I loved all of that. And I loved the advocates' robing room. I really miss going into the robing room now and having chats with colleagues.
I think it's I mean, even both from my time in chambers and even now, where I still do actually have quite a big degree of flexibility over my day. You know, I wouldn't say it's actually in practice any different from being in chambers. You know, I really set the times I work, weekends or evenings or but I like that sort of ability to sort of decide for yourself, obviously taking into account what the case needs and the client needs, but to shape the case, you know, to decide, you know, yeah, they often used to say when I was at bar school, you're paid for your opinion, you know, you don't sit on the fence. And I like that sort of ability to decide, okay, you know, sometimes it's quite scary or tiring or but to decide you know, to make decisions about what is the what do I think is the best way forward for the case? And you know that it might not, you know, there are other ways to do it. But I like that sort of feeling of being of sort of, yeah, independence and sort of control. You know, someone is not really telling me what to, you need to achieve a certain outcome, but someone is not really telling me what to do. I still sort of decide for myself.
I completely agree with what's just been said, and especially in relation to what Jessica said. I find that the bar is a far friendlier place than the solicitor world. It's unbelievable. As soon as I walked into chambers, I got about 5 invites to different things, and just the robing room banter as well. Um it's hilarious. You can be having the worst day ever with the worst client ever, and you go into there, and somebody just makes you feel so much better. And whoever's in there, you know, if you need some advice, you can just turn to them, and they maybe having the busiest day ever, but not once has anybody told me to go away, or that, you know, they've pulled up a chair and they've said, sit down, right, we can talk through it. And having that it's so amazing. Um, Aside to that, tomorrow I looked at my diary and I thought, oh, I might be able to have a cheeky afternoon off tomorrow. So called the Clarks. Can you keep me free tomorrow afternoon? Yeah, no problem. That's fine. Done, dusted. Got the afternoon off. So that's also good. But on the other hand, you know, there are weekends that I don't have off, where my friends are out and about and doing whatever they want. But you know, that's definitely a good thing about this profession on one hand.
Yes, I think that's true. And sometimes even though you don't take the afternoon off, right, you just know that you could somehow. And that's very nice. I mean, although as I say, I do actually have that as employed as well, but it was something I really valued in the, you know, in when I was in chambers, was just that feeling that freedom was just around the corner, you know, if you wanted, even though you maybe rarely took it. But yeah, it's a nice feeling.
Yeah, I thought the end of that story, Emily, was going to be that they gave you instructions anyway, or they gave you a case anyway. So I was really glad that it was a
No,
nice.
I've had my shocking return of the week, so that's me done for this week.
Excellent. So this kind of related, but so I don't know that this panel is necessarily the best people to ask, but I will ask it anyway because I think maybe Emily's perspective will be an interesting one. It's around kind of working from home and versus still going into chambers. Do you find that most people in your set are still in chambers all the time, or in courts all the time, or is working from home a bit more common?
I think it depends in which area you do. CVP, which is the video link into courts, it is far more common now because of COVID. It's one of the benefits of very few benefits of COVID. So it is more common. However, I can only really speak from a criminal perspective, criminal bar perspective. We still have to go to court most days. It's very rare that I'm just doing video links all day. I still have to go on prison visits, depending on whether or not you can even get a video link or a visit, because that's a big issue at the minute. I know that chambers are saying that people aren't going in anymore, and there's a real concern that there's not that vibe that there once was. And so I'm very much encouraged to go in. I know when I was a probationary tenant, if I didn't go in once a week, it was noted. And I get it. You know, a lot of chambers are very expensive and costly buildings to be in. And so us not being there doesn't help. But it definitely has moved to a more remote environment in other areas. But I do think that's why having a chambers where they've got plenty of stuff going on is helpful. I know next month I'm in chambers for events 3 Thursdays in a row. So it is. It can be a lonely life if you let it be, I think. But it depends what area you're going to go in.
Yeah, I've certainly heard that kind of at the kind of competition bar, you know, a lot of people doing some of the chancery, even some commercial work where you are in court, you know, from time to time, sometimes for many weeks, but then not, you know, for months. I have heard that that there's a lot of home working now. You know, in one of the chambers in London, I was in discussions because I might be going back, joining chambers again. And you know, they did explain that there is a lot of home working, you know, and people, but you know, particularly perhaps it's particularly also then a London thing because you've got people living out of town and then the commute and so on. But it did seem to be a little bit of an issue. But as in many workplaces, I don't think the bar is unique there, you know. It's a little bit everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. And that is definitely something to consider asking, or, you know, either at like a pupillage open evening or open day, or even during the kind of interview process, is around, yeah, you know, how common is it for everyone to be working from home, for example, on one day, or what kinds of events, you know, do you put on as chambers to try and kind of foster that working environment. So yeah, these are all questions that you're well within your rights to ask and to try and research as well. Someone's asked what kind of challenges you might face when transferring from sort of being a solicitor to being a barrister.
Shall I have a go at that one? One of the challenges I faced regularly, and I don't know if Emily's had the same, is there was a little bit of people that had come down the traditional route would question whether I had been properly trained because I hadn't done a pupillage, and I'd never had a pupil master or mistress as they were known. And so I think I perhaps had to demonstrate that I could do the job, but there were things that I hadn't learned about me. When I first started, briefs still came wrapped with pink tape, and there were systems about what you did with the brief and how you managed it, which I didn't know. And because I hadn't done a traditional pupillage, I think sometimes people felt I'd missed out and didn't know the proper way to be a barrister, but you can overcome that. And I was able to bring in, as Emily's talked about, the experience of being a solicitor. And so for your solicitor clients, you've got a greater awareness really of what they're doing. And so there were swings and roundabouts involved.
I definitely felt that way. I have to say it was more from the senior end of the bar. One of the good things now when you qualify though is that for 3 years you have to have some form of a supervisor, and my chambers gave me a mentor, and because I'd only done purely criminal defence work, I got somebody who mostly prosecuted. So in fact, it actually helped me a lot. And so I think that if you're in a good chambers, they'll give you that support. And in fact, you do need that support. One of the things I had to do was shadowing, which actually I found beneficial. But also, when you try and make the point, well, I've been shadowing counsel because I've been a solicitor, some it definitely sometimes falls on deaf ears that you have the experience you have, but it's not because that, you know, it's a rudeness. I just think it's a lack of understanding in what you do as a solicitor, and what you've done, and in fact that's where myself and Jessica probably benefited in our career as a barrister, because we do know what they've done and we have a real respect for what they do. I say to all my solicitors, look, if there's anything I can do, let me know. If I can save you a job, I will do. So I think there is a snobbery, but it's a lack of understanding for what you've done in your past rather than anything personal, I think.
That's great. Thanks, guys. I think I'm going to draw it to a close there, just because I think, yeah, kind of quite a few people have kind of dropped off. So thanks very much to our lovely panel for their contributions. Thank you very much to everyone who attended. I'll be sending around kind of a feedback form for people to complete. It will take 30 seconds afterwards, as well as the recording tomorrow. So thank you very much for coming along and for all your excellent questions. We hope you found it helpful. Otherwise, have a lovely evening. Hopefully go and enjoy some nice dinner. My partner's cooking for me. I can smell it. So, so yeah, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you all. Nice to meet you.